world knows skyscrapers, those massive glass giants piercing the clouds above New York, London, Toronto, symbols of power, of money, of people who run the world. But here's a question most people never think to ask. Who actually owns them? Not the people renting offices, not the corporations with logos on the top floor. I mean the people who truly own the towers, the blocks, the skylines. What if I told you that not too long ago, one quiet immigrant family from Toronto held the keys to some of the most valuable real estate on Earth? Entire blocks of Manhattan, whole districts in London, skyscrapers stretching from Chicago to Houston. A family so influential that at their peak, they weren't just wealthy, they were controlling the very ground beneath the world's financial arteries. And then, in a snap, it all disappeared. Just vanished. Poof. A $13 billion empire gone like smoke in the wind. It sounds dramatic. It sounds impossible. Maybe even unbelievable. But it happened. And the truth behind it is stranger and more human than any fiction. This is the rise and fall of the Reichmann family. Refugees who outran death. Builders who carved a new life out of concrete and steel. Visionaries who reshaped the skylines of 2 continents. And gamblers who placed one massive bet and watched the world flip upside down. By the late 1980s, their company, Olympia York, or ONY, wasn't just successful, it was everywhere. In Manhattan, their crown jewel rose over Battery Park City, the World Financial Center, 4 colossal granite and glass towers forming a fortress for Wall Street's elite. In Toronto, their buildings dominated the skyline. In London, they were preparing to launch the most ambitious urban project in Europe. And around the world, people spoke their name with a mix of awe and confusion. How did these men do this? Where did they come from? Is this even real? Their empire was valued at over $13 billion, a number so staggering that even today, it feels unreal. This was a family from Canada, not Dubai, not New York, not Hong Kong, suddenly playing chess with the world's biggest players and winning. But nothing in their story started with luxury or privilege. No silver spoon, no inherited fortune. The Reichmanns began life moving in the shadows of the Holocaust. Orthodox Jews fleeing the terror of Nazi-occupied Europe. They escaped with their lives and little else. When they arrived in Toronto, they weren't moguls. They weren't tycoons. They were simply workers, humble, disciplined, fiercely private, trying to rebuild what war had tried to erase. Paul, Albert, and Ralph Reichmann started small, very small, the kind of small that no one notices. Warehouses, tiny office blocks, storage units. But from day one, they did things differently. No shortcuts, no flashy risks, no ego. Every brick laid, every design approved, every dollar spent carried the weight of obligation to their family, to their faith, to the idea that excellence is not an act, but a habit. And Paul Reichmann, quiet, modest, almost shy, was the brain and soul of it all. He didn't dress rich. He didn't act rich. He barely even lived like a rich man. But his vision? Oh, that was massive. He could look at a barren lot, a forgotten warehouse district, a broken neighborhood, and see a skyline growing there, rising, changing everything. His genius wasn't loud, it was relentless. And the world noticed. Toronto changed first, then New York, then London. And with every project, with every victory, with every risk that paid off, the momentum grew stronger, bigger, almost unstoppable. But here's the thing about momentum. It can carry you forward or push you right over the edge. Because in the world of real estate, in the world of mega projects and billion-dollar dreams, success has a shadow, a dangerous one. The bigger you grow, the more fragile you become. One wrong move, one market shift, one overextended gamble, and everything can crash hard. And for the Reichmanns, that moment was coming, quietly, slowly, like a storm forming on a clear horizon. And when it hit, it would explode with the force of a financial earthquake. In this story, you'll see how three immigrant brothers built an empire of steel, and how one decision, one massive, visionary, impossible dream called Canary Wharf, became the fault line beneath their entire kingdom. So stay with me, because the deeper we go, the stranger, darker, and more extraordinary this story becomes. This is the rise and fall of the Reichmann family, the family that owned half of Wall Street and almost lost everything. It's almost impossible to picture it now. To walk through Toronto's financial district, surrounded by steel, glass, and the quiet hum of billion-dollar deals. And imagine that the men who would one day reshape skylines across the world once stepped onto Canadian soil with nothing. Not wealth, not influence, not certainty, nothing except the clothes they carried and the ghosts of a world that tried to erase them. The Reichmann family arrived in Canada in the fragile aftermath of World War II. Refugees not just in name, but in soul. They had survived Nazi Europe, survived the disintegration of everything familiar, survived the unthinkable. Their earliest memories weren't playgrounds or schoolyards. They were borders, soldiers, silence, fear. The fear of being seen, of being discovered, of being unwanted in their own world. And still, within that darkness, they carried an ember, hope. Hope that somewhere, somehow, they could rebuild. Hope that safety wasn't a fantasy. Hope that a future could be earned with hard work, faith, and discipline. Imagine stepping into a new country, into harsh winters, unfamiliar languages, unfamiliar streets, and knowing that the survival of your entire family depends on what you build with your own two hands. No inheritance, no connections, no map, only determination. That was the foundation of Paul, Albert, and Ralph Reichmann's lives. Canada didn't hand them opportunity. It handed them a blank page. And blank pages are terrifying, unless you have the courage to write something new. From the very beginning, the brothers relied on the values that had carried their family through war and exile. Discipline, integrity, humility, and unity. While other builders cut corners, they refused. While other developers inflated numbers, they stayed honest. While competitors rushed to grow, the Reichmanns perfected their craft quietly, almost invisibly. Their first buildings were small, nondescript warehouses, modest, low-rise offices, tucked far from the glamour of downtown. No headlines, no fanfare, no prestige. But these early projects became their laboratory, their training ground, the place where they learned everything that would later allow them to build empires. Slowly, investors began to sense something different about the Reichmann brothers. Contractors talked, tenants talked, bankers, always watching, began to notice patterns. These guys don't miss deadlines. These guys don't cheat. These guys don't brag. These guys deliver. That reputation, the quiet, unshakable kind, became their real currency. In 1958, they finally formalized what they had been building all along: Olympia and York. The name would eventually become legendary, a symbol of ambition, precision, and unimaginable scale. But at the start, it was nothing more than three brothers renting a modest office, dreaming big and working even bigger. Their growth in the 1960s was steady, relentless, almost methodical. Every completed building earned new trust. Every new contract opened a new door. Every project became proof that you didn't need to shout to be powerful. But here's what truly set them apart. They stayed humble. Reichmann, the visionary, lived almost ascetically. No luxury cars, no glittering parties, no ego-driven displays. His brilliance was quiet, internal, and focused entirely on the work. And that humility wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Because in business, humility breeds trust, and trust builds empires. By the late 1960s, Olympia and York wasn't just a successful company. It was a rising force. Toronto began to change. Towers rose where empty fields once sat. Financial firms moved into buildings stamped with the O&Y name. Contractors competed for their business. Banks offered them terms no one else could get. But beneath the growth, something far deeper was happening, something almost invisible. A mindset was forming, a belief that the impossible was simply the unattempted, a conviction that if they worked harder, fought bigger, and remained disciplined, they could reshape not just neighborhoods, but entire cities. And yet, even as they ascended, one question began whispering beneath the surface of their story. How far can faith, discipline, and ambition take you before ambition demands more than you can pay? That question would become the defining tension of their empire, the invisible thread that ties this entire saga together. Because for the Reichmanns, the journey from refugees to real estate titans wasn't just about building wealth. It was about proving something far more profound, that even in a world that once tried to destroy them, they could build something no one could ignore. And the world did notice. Soon, their ambitions would grow beyond Toronto, beyond Canada, beyond anything the real estate world had ever seen. And that's where the story transforms, from rise to audacity, from survival to empire. By the 1960s, Toronto was changing. The city's streets were waking up to a new era. Cranes clawed at the clouds. Steel skeletons of ambition rose above the old neighborhoods. And everywhere you looked, there was a hunger for progress, modernity, and power. And in the middle of it all, quietly, almost invisibly, the Reichmann brothers were making their mark. Small warehouses and modest office buildings were no longer enough. They were thinking bigger, much bigger. Paul Reichmann, the eldest, was the architect of this vision, not merely in blueprints and beams, though he knew every line, every foundation, every hidden support better than most engineers. But in the way he saw opportunity, where others saw risk, Paul saw possibility. Where competitors hesitated, he moved, carefully, decisively, almost as if he could see the future. His insight wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. People in Toronto began to notice subtle changes. A new tower here, an office complex there. And with each completion, Olympia and York's reputation grew, fast, almost unnervingly fast. By the late 1960s, Olympia and York was no longer just a construction company. It had become a symbol, a standard of excellence. The brothers' name was synonymous with reliability, precision, and trustworthiness. Tenants loved their buildings. Investors leaned forward when they spoke. Banks opened doors that had once been closed. And it wasn't luck. It was discipline. A combination of vision, patience, and meticulous adherence to principles that many overlooked in the rush for shortcuts. The 1970s were a turning point. Toronto's commercial real estate market boomed. Office towers shot up across the skyline like steel and glass monuments to ambition. And the Reichmanns were at the forefront. From the Scotia Plaza to the Toronto Dominion Centre and countless other landmark projects, each building bore their signature: flawless design, absolute reliability, and a quiet insistence on quality. Every tower was more than a building. It was a statement, a message. The city took notice. This family didn't just build structures. They built confidence. They built belief. They built legacies. Yet through all this growth, Paul Reichmann remained a ghost behind the empire. He didn't crave headlines. He didn't seek applause. He immersed himself in details, plans, schedules, blueprints, the minutiae that others ignored. And that quiet genius, that relentless discipline, became the engine driving a now unstoppable enterprise. People called them meticulous. They called them reliable. Soon, some whispered the word that would follow them forever: legendary. And then came the United States. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Houston beckoned. Urban centers filled with opportunity. Prime locations, growing markets, ambitious clients. For a developer with Paul's vision, they weren't obstacles, they were invitations. Carefully, strategically, the Reichmanns expanded south, applying the lessons learned in Toronto. Every project reinforced the last. Every success became leverage for the next. By the early 1980s, Olympia and York wasn't just recognized. It was feared, admired, and envied. Millions of square feet of prime office space stretching across North America. A reputation as meticulous builders who could take the impossible and turn it into reality. Whispers in boardrooms: the Canadians can make anything work. And all the while, Paul was the silent captain at the helm, ensuring that every investment, every blueprint, every deal aligned perfectly with the empire's ever-growing vision. But as every rising story knows, growth has a shadow. The line between discipline and obsession is thin. What had begun as careful, patient expansion was slowly tipping into audacity. Every success fueled confidence. Every new tower whispered, "You can do more." And somewhere in the quiet calculations, a seed of daring was planted. A seed that would one day sprout into a gamble of unimaginable scale. Even as the skyline transformed, cranes clattering, towers reaching higher, the Reichmanns weren't just shaping cities, they were shaping belief. Belief that they could transform landscapes, dominate markets, and leave an indelible mark on the world. And yet, ambition has its own gravity. Vision can pull thee forward or drag thee into risk. By the end of this decade, the Reichmanns weren't just builders. They were empire makers. And as they turned their gaze beyond Canada, toward New York, toward London, toward a dream that seemed almost impossible, the stage was being set for the highest highs, for the most audacious gamble, for a fall that no one would see coming. Because the higher you climb, the further you can fall. And even the men who rebuilt skyscrapers, reshaped cities, and commanded respect across continents would soon face a challenge that would test everything they had built, everything they had believed in. By the early 1980s, Olympia and York wasn't just a Canadian powerhouse. It had become a North American legend. Toronto's skyline was no longer just glass and steel. It was their signature. And their ambition didn't stop at borders. The Reichmann brothers were setting their sights on something far larger: the world. Their crown jewel in Toronto alone included skyscrapers that had reshaped the city: the Scotia Plaza, Toronto Dominion Centre, First Canadian Place, CIBC Tower, and Royal Bank Plaza. Buildings that not only defined the skyline, but also defined the very standard of modern office construction. Each project reflected their precision, reliability, and quiet confidence. By now, they had completed more than 20 major commercial projects in Toronto alone, each one a testament to their discipline and vision. And then came the United States. New York beckoned like a giant, its skyline already legendary, yet not impenetrable. Olympia and York seized the opportunity. They'd bought prime Manhattan real estate and embarked on the monumental World Financial Center in Battery Park City. 4 massive towers, gleaming with granite and glass, built to house some of the world's largest financial institutions. It was more than a building. It was a fortress, a statement, a warning. The Reichmanns had arrived. Chicago wasn't far behind. The brothers acquired office space and completed projects like the North Pier office complex and the One North LaSalle building, adding their disciplined mark to the Windy City. Houston, too, felt their touch, with projects such as the Gulf Tower offices and Bank of America Center, cementing their reputation across the continent. By now, Olympia and York controlled more than 100 million square feet of prime office space across Toronto, New York, Chicago, and Houston, a staggering footprint for a family that had started with nothing. And yet, their ambitions weren't confined to North America. London was calling. The city was bursting at the seams. The financial district of the City of London was overcrowded, and Margaret Thatcher's deregulation policies had opened the door for bold visionaries. The Reichmanns saw an opportunity in the derelict docklands, a chance to create a brand new financial hub, a European Wall Street. They would call it Canary Wharf. But let's pause for a moment. Look at the scale of what they had already achieved. Toronto, Scotia Plaza, Toronto Dominion Centre, First Canadian Place, CIBC Tower, Royal Bank Plaza, and 15+ additional office projects. New York, World Financial Center, 4 towers, multiple prime Manhattan office buildings. Chicago, One North LaSalle, North Pier office complex, among others. Houston, Gulf Tower offices, Bank of America Center, additional downtown projects. Altogether, more than 40 major skyscraper and office projects across 3 countries, each reflecting the same unwavering discipline, the same meticulous planning, the same quiet, relentless ambition. And yet, for the Reichmanns, it wasn't enough. Ambition demanded more. The world was watching. People whispered in boardrooms, "These Canadians, they can do the impossible." Investors were in awe. Banks were ready to lend. Governments and municipalities cleared the path. Olympia and York had built an empire of trust, of precision, of absolute reliability. And now, they were about to step onto the next stage, one that would eclipse everything they had done before. Because Canary Wharf wasn't just another project, it was their most audacious gamble, a vision that stretched the limits of imagination, capital, and risk. A project that could transform not only a derelict corner of London, but also the Reichmanns' entire destiny. And yet, as anyone who has climbed high knows, the higher the empire grows, the more fragile it becomes. The cranes hovered over Battery Park City, over Toronto's gleaming towers, over London's docklands, and everywhere in between, whispering a simple truth: power is intoxicating, ambition is seductive, and the next move, can either cement a legacy or destroy everything. And for the Reichmanns, that next move, the one looming on the horizon, would define not only their empire, but their very lives. London in the late 1980s was alive with change. Streets buzzed with ambition. Skyscrapers glinted in the morning sun. Margaret Thatcher's deregulation had unleashed a wave of opportunity, and the financial world was hungry for expansion. But in the east of the city, the Docklands told a very different story. Abandoned wharves, derelict warehouses, empty streets stretching for miles. It was a place most people avoided, a place that whispered of decay and risk. For the Reichmann brothers, though, it was an invitation, a blank canvas, a chance to take everything they had built in Toronto, New York, Chicago, and Houston, and create something unprecedented in Europe. Paul Reichmann and his brothers imagined Canary Wharf, a new financial hub that would rival Wall Street itself. 4 towers of steel and glass, streets lined with banks, offices bustling with commerce. A city reborn from the mud and mist of East London. It was audacious, bold, almost impossible, and it required everything. Every ounce of capital, every connection, every bit of the Reichmann magic. Construction began in the year 187. Cranes clawed the sky. Steel beams rose from the muddy ground, like fingers stretching toward possibility. The family poured billions into the project. Over $3 billion, borrowed from banks who had once trusted them blindly. Every brick, every window, every detail reflected decades of discipline, precision, and vision. And for a moment, it seemed unstoppable. Canary Wharf gleamed, a city of promise, a monument to audacity. But ambition is a double-edged sword. By the early 1990s, the world shifted. A global recession swept across markets. Real estate prices dropped. Interest rates rose. And London's financial institutions, comfortable in their historic city offices, hesitated. Banks didn't move. Companies didn't lease space. Canary Wharf, designed to be the beating heart of European finance, stood empty. Ghostly elevators rose and fell in silent towers. Streets intended for commerce were deserted. The dream had become a ghost town. Debt, once a tool for building, became a weapon against them. Over $20 billion in loans, stretched beyond reason. The empire, carefully constructed over decades, suddenly teetered on the edge. Billions evaporated. Headlines screamed. Investors panicked. A largest bankruptcy in Canadian history was declared in 1992, and the world watched in disbelief. How could the family that had mastered skyscrapers, that had built towers across continents, that had earned a reputation for meticulous discipline, fall so hard? It wasn't recklessness. It wasn't stupidity. It was the consequence of ambition meeting circumstance. One miscalculation, one bet on timing, scale, and human behavior had unraveled everything. And, in the silence of those empty towers, the enormity of the collapse was visible to anyone willing to look. Empire, once absolute, had a fragile underbelly. And sometimes, the higher you climb, the further you fall. Emotion ran deep. This wasn't just money lost. Reputation built over decades evaporated almost overnight. Tenants who once trusted them looked elsewhere. Investors who believed in their vision doubted. Governments who had welcomed them watched cautiously. And yet, even in the heart of failure, there was no bitterness, no surrender, only the quiet, unyielding determination of a family shaped by hardship, discipline, and the belief that work and integrity endure beyond fortune. Canary Wharf became a cautionary tale, a city of empty streets, towers glinting under the sun, yet devoid of life, a reminder to anyone who dreams big. Leverage builds faster than anything else, and it can destroy faster too. Every success carries risk, every ambition casts shadows, and sometimes even the most brilliant, even the most meticulous, find themselves facing a fall they never imagined. But the story doesn't end here. Because if you watch closely, you see the seed of resilience, the quiet strength of Paul Reichmann, the discipline and patience that had carried them from Toronto warehouses to Manhattan skyscrapers. Even in the shadow of bankruptcy, even in the silence of ghostly towers, there was a flicker of hope, a chance to rise again. And in this collapse, the world saw more than failure. They saw courage. They saw humility. They saw the fragile brilliance of ambition. Canary Wharf wasn't just a gamble. It was a lesson, a dramatic, human, emotional story of risk, vision, and the price of dreaming too big. The bankruptcy of Olympia and York in 1992 wasn't just a headline. It was a seismic shock to the financial world. Billions had vanished. Towers that had gleamed like symbols of power now stood half-empty, like monuments to ambition gone wrong. And for the Reichmann family, it felt like losing everything. Imagine standing in London's Docklands, surrounded by massive glass and steel towers, buildings that should hum with life, offices that should echo with the clatter of keyboards, the chatter of deals being made, but instead, silence. The streets were empty. Elevators moved with no passengers. Canary Wharf was a ghost town, a city built for ambition, yet abandoned in the wake of miscalculation. And for the family who had poured everything into it, the weight of failure was unbearable. Yet, in the midst of this devastation, the Reichmanns did something remarkable. They didn't vanish. They didn't disappear into obscurity. There were no headlines about anger, no tales of revenge. Instead, there was humility, there was reflection, and there was work. Paul Reichmann, the quiet architect of the empire, understood that while fortune can be fleeting, integrity and perseverance endure. In the years that followed, Paul led negotiations with creditors, investors, and governments. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to reclaim a part of what had been lost, not for personal glory, but to see the dream of Canary Wharf fulfilled. By the mid-1990s, after years of careful maneuvering and collaboration with new investors, Paul managed to buy back a stake in the project, and slowly, life returned. Banks moved in, businesses leased offices. The ghost towers began to hum with activity once more. It was a testament not just to vision, but to resilience, to the power of discipline, humility, and relentless effort. Canary Wharf, once a symbol of near-total collapse, gradually transformed into one of London's most important business districts. Streets that had been empty echoed with commerce. Elevators carried thousands of workers each day. The gleaming towers Paul had envisioned decades earlier were finally alive. But here's the truth. The empire they had built, the global network of properties and billions of dollars in personal wealth, was gone forever. Olympia and York would never again command the same absolute control over real estate. The family had lost their financial crown, yet in losing it, they gained something perhaps more enduring: respect. a legacy of brilliance, courage, and unwavering work ethic. Paul Reichmann became remembered not just as a man who built skyscrapers, but as a man who rebuilt dreams, quietly, deliberately, with patience and humility. And for those watching, there's a lesson that resonates far beyond real estate. The story of the Reichmanns reminds us that brilliance alone isn't enough. Timing matters. Circumstance matters. Debt, leverage, and ambition can be allies, or they can be deadly foes. And sometimes, the greatest victory lies not in the heights you reach, but in your ability to rise after a fall. So, as Canary Wharf hums with life today, it stands as both a monument to vision and a reminder of caution. A ghost city reborn, a dream reclaimed, and the man who quietly guided it, Paul Reichmann, left a legacy of perseverance that inspires far beyond the walls of glass and steel. If thou hast been captivated by this story of ambition, brilliance, and resilience, there's more to come. Stories that challenge, thrill, and inspire, showing us the fragile balance between vision and risk, fortune and fate. Make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications, because the journey doesn't end here. Up next, we explore other empires, their rise, their fall, and the lessons hidden in their triumphs and disasters. The Reichmanns showed us how to rise after the fall, but the next story will show just how quickly even the most brilliant can vanish. Stay with us. The lessons of ambition are far from over. As we look back at the rise and fall of the Reichmann Empire, one truth stands out above all else. Ambition is both a ladder and a razor. It can lift you higher than you ever imagined and cut deeper than you ever expected. Canary Wharf, empty and silent in its early years, stands as a monument to that duality. A ghost city reminding us that vision without timing, leverage without caution, can turn triumph into tragedy almost overnight. Debt is a double-edged sword. In the hands of the disciplined, it can be a tool that multiplies success, expands opportunity, and accelerates growth. But when circumstances shift, when the market turns, when interest rates rise, when tenants hesitate, debt can become a weapon that slices through everything you've built. The Reichmanns learned this lesson a hard way. One miscalculation, one bet that didn't land as expected, erased billions and toppled an empire. And yet, their brilliance wasn't in question. Their foresight, their discipline, their integrity, these were never lost. It's a lesson that resonates far beyond real estate. Today, in an age of rapid innovation, massive leverage, and global connectivity, the principles are the same. Timing matters. Prudence matters. Even the smartest. Most disciplined individuals can be undone by forces outside their control. Look at the stories of financial titans in the modern era, from markets disrupted by technology to empires built and lost in cryptocurrency almost overnight. The Reichmann story is timeless. Leverage builds fast, but it destroys faster. And ambition, no matter how brilliant, always carries risk. Yet there's also hope. The Reichmanns didn't vanish. They didn't allow failure to define them. Paul Reichmann's quiet return to Canary Wharf, turning ghost towers into thriving financial hubs, is a testament to resilience. Humility, patience, and persistence are just as important as vision. And that is perhaps the greatest takeaway of all. In the face of disaster, the ability to rise again, to learn, adapt, and rebuild is what separates fleeting success from a lasting legacy. For viewers today, the parallels are striking. Every entrepreneur, investor, or dreamer faces moments where risk teeters on the edge of catastrophe. The question isn't just whether you can succeed, but whether you can respond when the tides turn. Canary Wharf was the Reichmann's ultimate gamble, a lesson in timing, leverage, and ambition. But it was also the stage on which resilience proved its power. And as we watch the modern world, with new empires rising and falling at record speed, the lessons remain urgent, relevant, and alive. So, as we close this chapter, ask thyself, how do we measure ambition? Is it by what we build, or by how we recover when it crumbles? The Reichmanns built towers, shaped skylines, and amassed billions. And yet the true story is not the numbers, not the fame, not even the failure. It is the human story of courage, discipline, and the relentless pursuit of vision, even in the face of overwhelming loss. And the story doesn't end with them. Next, we'll explore another empire, different in shape, in technology, in scale, yet strikingly similar in lesson. The rise and fall of Sam Bankman-Fried, a modern billionaire whose digital fortune vanished almost as quickly as it was made, reminds us that ambition, leverage, and timing continue to define success and failure today. Before we dive into the next story, take a moment to reflect. The towers rise and fall. Fortune comes and goes. But the lessons of patience, humility, and calculated risk endure. This is the legacy of the Reichmanns. Their story is a warning, a guide, and a source of inspiration all at once. If you followed this journey, if the rise and fall of this empire has captivated you, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. The next story promises insight, drama, and lessons that are just as vital today as they were decades ago. Because the world of ambition never sleeps, and the empires of tomorrow will test courage, discipline, and vision, just as the Reichmanns were tested in theirs. The towers still stand, the lessons remain, and the question lingers. When you build your empire, will it rise or will it fall?